Usually we sing sacred the land, sacred the water, sacred the sky, holy and true. We usually sing that just to start because that's what this is all about, just to bring back sacredness. But the nuclear prayer that is written by Right Reverend William Swing is just very fitting. The beginning and the end are in your hands, O God, creator of the universe. And in our hands you have placed the fate of this planet. We who are tested by having both creative and destructive power in our free will turn to you in sober fear and intoxicating hope. We ask for your guidance and to share in your imagination in our deliberations about the use of nuclear force. Help us to lift the fog of atomic darkness that hovers so pervasively over our earth, your earth, so that soon all eyes may see life magnified by your pure light. Bless all of us who wait today for your presence and who dedicate ourselves to achieve your intended peace and rightful equilibrium on earth. In the name of all that is holy and all that is hoped for. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
So we're going to speak quite rapidly based on the fact that we really need much more time to give you this urgent message. We hope to draw all of us and all your groups into working on a treaty that has passed at the United Nations that eliminates all nuclear weapons from the face of the earth. So that is my motivation, that is our motivation, is to involve you in that. And it's really done for the purpose of the 140 million people in the United States who now live in poverty and the billions in the world, that this planet must come back to an equilibrium, to an awareness that all is sacred, all is holy, all of creation. And there are all these issues that are part of it. And so I'm going to go through it. I mean, each one can be enumerated, but I'm going to go through them quickly, and then you can think of all the ones you can add to it. But we are about empire building. We are about war making. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Ukraine, Sudan, Syria, Yemen, Palestine, coups now in Venezuela, Iran, sanctions in North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Cuba, etc. And a major use of fossil fuels. So the ongoing abuse by the military-industrial complex, the greatest purveyor of destruction on Mother Earth. 800 plus military bases of the United States in anywhere from 80 to 150 countries, all of them polluting and contaminating Mother Earth and water as part of it. The treaties have been broken, all kinds of treaties. The ABM Treaty, the Outer Space Treaty, the treaty with Iran, it's called the JCPOA. NPT Treaty has been broken, the INF Treaty, the START Treaty. And so you might say, well, why are you working so hard, Ardeth, on a treaty when this president and the presidents before have just wiped them out by breaking them? And we'll answer that. So, and there are new weapons being constructed with a $1.7 trillion put aside, and it's being used at this point to create not modernization only, but new weapons totally defiant of a treaty that was passed 48, 49 years ago now. And then the new nuclear posture review to build small nukes so that they can be used. Now, how insane can that be? And then all the places where we've given weapons, U.S. weapons are on the soil, as you know, of Belgium, the Netherlands, Italy, Germany. Our warheads are in England and then also Turkey, where there's been major war across the border with Syria. And then drone warfare going on. Drone warfare that has its ugly head of wasting funds, killing people on an ongoing basis all over the world. Our drone bases are now being facilitated to be used. So that's just part of it. The U.S. sells 1/3 of all the arms, the weapons that are sold. It is the United States' big business. It is where the money comes into all those corporations that we're going to talk about. And poverty is rampant. You know, there's a question, but what I just read is that 26 billionaires control the wealth of 1/2 of the people of the world, 3.8 billion people. And these are the lowest income. So the gap between the haves and the have-nots. It was written about in Vision for 2020, a government document that came out in 1996. And that said, we have to control the fourth frontier, outer space, so that we can complete the kill chain, which is to have weapons to be able to be used from space, through space, and into space. Why? Because with the globalization, there's going to be a big gap between the haves and the have-nots. This is government documents saying this. And so therefore, we have to have that fourth frontier. We know that opioids, drugs, small guns, assault rifles, you know, that March for Our Lives has taken that on. And we know that the young people are marching and dealing with the political essentials. We know that the Latinos and Muslims have been banned from our country. They're swept up regularly for deportation regarding ICE. And so we know that whole element of issue. The environmental disasters are horrific. Fires, floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, and people saying that there isn't a problem. And then we know the young Greta right now working toward the UN presentation, coming over in a boat, trying to witness, you know, the lack of destruction of Mother Earth. So here we have these businesses and educational centers and corporations and lending institutions and investments all going toward the big business of investing in mass murder rather than in life. So here we are together. And you know, there is a background to all of this. And so when ICANN began organizing in the year 2007, they were about mobilizing groups like us. And so groups of churches and businesses and so on began plugging in. We're up to 541 groups like that now in the United States and in about 103 countries. So this is what came to the United Nations together. They're one civil society as part of the group gathering. The group that really gathered were the ambassadors, and about 132 nations first met in 2017 in March, and then in June and July. So when these ambassadors came together, they allowed the Holy See and Vietnam to become part of the voting delegates. That was their first move. They also then said the civil societies in the United Nations could address the assembly, which is amazing. These are regular people, you know, trying to be able to express themselves. So I'm going to pass this first one around. You can see Elaine White Gomez, hands in the air. This is after the treaty was accepted. And so she facilitated the assembly. Magnificent woman doing her part in bringing together for the solution of any conflicts that were part of that assembly. Secondly, we have Beatrice Finn. Beatrice also she's the director of ICANN, But she facilitated daily all these groups of civil societies to come to one common accord. And when we needed something within that treaty, this was the work being done. She led it. And also, the one that really inspired this whole movement, the Hibakisha Setsuko Thuro, who worked all her life. She was 13 years old when the bomb dropped. She was in the midst of it. She was at a center at that time. Every one of her classmates were killed in that bombing of Hiroshima. And so she lives in Canada, but she has been out and about all these years. Her story really deeply touched our head, Elaine White Gomez. It touched her so deeply. And so she, along with Beatrice and many others, were really part of bringing it into fruition. So it's called the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Leading to Their Total Elimination. That's the heading of the conference that was given. So that we have the ambassadors, and of course, you probably saw in the New York Times that Nikki Haley gathered with the NATO nations and protested it and said, well, you're all naive. We need nuclear weapons. We have to have them. And here are these nations. We're not going to participate at all in it. We're encouraging all the nations that are connected with us as allies not to have anything to do with it. So thanks be to God they weren't there. It's the first United Nations Assembly regarding nuclear weapons that really was able to accomplish something. Because in 2015 and 2000, they just destroyed it when they wanted to make a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. I mean, the United States just stopped it all along with Israel. So some of the groups are the Hibakisha, the International Red Cross, Red Crescent, lawyers were there, the people who spoke were parts of like Fiji and Marshall Islands and all these different groups that were deeply affected by nuclear weapon tests and nuclear weapons. Pax Christi, WELF, the World Council of Churches, all the scientists, unions, experts, parliamentarians, observers, NGOs, religious leaders. And so we filled the chambers every day. We started at 8 to 8:30 in the morning with all the faiths coming together at the Isaiah Wall. And every day a different faith led it. From 9 o'clock to 10, we went into the United Nations, and in an assembly room, we began to build as it related to that first draft that was being developed in March. From 1 to 3, we assembled in the General Assembly room. Now, you have never, maybe you've experienced this before, but every word, every phrase, every element of that treaty was discussed by every nation. How exciting it was for me to hear Iran. I mean, the leader from Iran, I loved him from the first moment. And then after that, each person from every nation speaking truth, about their convictions that nuclear weapons, the greatest threat on Mother Earth, had to be done away with now, and more so in this age with the dangers of the regimes that are forming throughout the world. And then from 3 to 6, we met again. But from 1 to 3, we assembled with the civil societies. We discussed every word they discussed. So on Saturday and Sunday, we held strategy meetings. Now, 3 drafts were formulated. The first draft in March went back to the nations, and all of the countries had a chance to speak about the terminology that was being used, etc. So when they came back in June to gather once again, we then had a chance to express this has deep humanitarian concerns within this. Know that before all of the talk in the United Nations, there were gatherings in Mexico, Norway, and Vienna, and people gathered, and they said, how can we finally get this to a point where we can get rid of all these nuclear weapons? So they really stressed the humanitarian and the environmental devastation. So it touched people where really they have to be touched to work hard on this type of treaty. So they talked about the accidents in the preamble, the first set. They talked about the accidents, the miscalculations, and how prevention would be difficulty and how you couldn't respond to any of this, the inability to address any of the consequences of the use and even the building of them. I mean, we don't talk enough about the testing and the building of the weapons and all of the urgency for medical needs in that. So the necessity to disarm, the unacceptable suffering, the ethical imperatives for nuclear disarmament, the urgency, the effects on indigenous people, abiding by international humanitarian law and international law and human rights law, the adherence to the principles of humanity and conscience, the concern for the economic and human resources going into it, the production, the maintenance, and the modernization, embodied in the treaties that were already developed, like the NPT and the CTBT, the Test Ban Treaty, and the verification process. So nuclear energy for peaceful purposes was talked about a lot. And I'll concur with most of us of the civil societies is they left that in. Nuclear power was left into the treaty because they didn't want the nuclear nonproliferation treaty that had it in, that they would say, well, that's defying those hundreds of nuclear power plants. But the feeling was that nuclear power plants, because of the urgency of the environmental devastation, that they would be going out eventually, and that they wouldn't need the plutonium that was produced by the nuclear power plants, which really started it to begin with. So we came up with a treaty, and this is it in a nutshell. The prohibitions are the most important part. I mean, the preamble that I just gave you is beautiful. You can read it. The treaty is online. You'll see the magnificent terminology used for how essential it is to have this treaty implemented. But this is what it prohibits. You can never, any nation can never, under any circumstances, develop, test, produce, manufacture, acquire, possess, cannot possess, stockpile any nuclear weapons or any nuclear explosive devices.
Nor threat to use.
Just a minute, I'm coming. Cannot transfer any nuclear weapon or any nuclear explosive or have control over it. Cannot receive the transfer or the control. That's all those the United States is the only one that's given all these nuclear weapons to all these other countries, all right? So really, nuclear weapons are on 14 countries' soil. They usually say 9, but we all know it's 14 with all the ones we've given. Cannot cannot give the transfer, cannot receive the transfer or the control over. Can never use or threaten to use nuclear weapons or nuclear explosive devices. That's deterrence. That is essential. Every day, all those nuclear weapons on land, in the water, and in the sky, there is the threat to use them. That, they claim, is essential because deterrence works. That's what they say. But in this treaty, cannot threaten to use. Can never assist, encourage, induce, seek, or receive any of the, or engage in any of the activities that are prohibited. Cannot allow any stationing of any installations or deployment of nuclear weapons are nuclear explosives. See, this, if you read the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that was passed by 191 nations in 1968 to 70, the signing of it, the commitment that every nation with nuclear weapons would get rid of them, and every nation that had never built them would not ever build them, because of that failure that they could still be possessed, that they could still be threatened to be used. You know, that whole concept of this is what preserves the peace, that therefore was a failure. But this is what is fitting in to the development now of a treaty that actually closes every loophole. And I really credit Elaine White Gomez for working through all the conflicts that came up with this terminology. So now you have to know this is the last category of weapons of mass destruction. In 1972, we passed the chemical weapon treaty. In 1972 was the biological, 1993 was the chemical weapons treaty, 1997 the landmine treaty, and 2008 was the cluster munitions. See, that's why I want us to be convinced treaties can work, because landmines are stigmatized to such portrayal of evil as they blow off the legs, etc., of people that have planted them in the lands of the war zones. It's such an evil that they don't build them anymore. And see, you remember when Syria supposedly used the chemical weapons. Why do you think the Syrian leader was not taken to the International Court of Justice like Milosevic was, or like some of the other war criminals? Because there's evidence that it was staged. There's evidence that if anyone used it, it could have been Israel. There's evidence that they could not get to as it related to the Syrian leader. So nobody went to the International Court of Justice for that. But see, you see that even though these treaties were in place, that they're pretty well solidified. And this is what the people in the assemblies really believe regarding this nuclear weapons treaty. I mean, the thing about it is, the young people in this assembly from all over the world, this ICANN group is an unbelievable, they remind me of like March for Our Lives and DACA and, you know, the environmentalists and, you know, these young people who have such a knowledge so early in their lives. These young people at this assembly never use the word if. They always use the word when. They want a nuclear-free world, and they want a world without war. They want a world without war in policy, that no human beings can kill other human beings, innocent people, men, women, and children, in other countries. So that's what's in place. Now, Carol and I have been working, and in our work predominantly, I want you to know what we do is we deliver this treaty, because when we go to every base, we have 100%. Do you know that we have 100% in giving the treaty? The only one that was failing us was the Pentagon, and Carol got that into the Pentagon in Good Friday this past year, and also it wouldn't go into Raytheon, and Carol got it into the stockholders meeting in at the hotel, which she's banned from now, but. But she got it into the hands of the leader, the new leader of Raytheon. So those are the only two that we failed in, and they're now there. And all of the other military sites all over this country where we've handed that treaty and we give it to the people and we say, you have a responsibility for this. And then what we do is we try to teach the treaty at the universities and the different places where we're invited and where we speak, so that young people are getting on fire, and, you know, cities are working for it, etc. So, you know, just so you know that that's in place. Now, just think about this. We are so connected, I feel, with the Kings Bay Plowshares and every plowshare action that ever went before it. We are one. Our quest is the same. Our quest is the elimination of all nuclear weapons. Sometime you work for direct action, sometime you work for political action, sometime you work for, the judicial action, but it's all one. I mean, the mother here bringing up those 4 children or 5 children, she has 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and now 5-year-old. I said, where's the 4-year-old? And, bringing up those children in a non-violent way and love of other people is just part of it all. One Trident submarine at Kings Bay will destroy a continent. Think about that. One Trident submarine. We have 14 of them. So we only need 7 if we're going to destroy every continent, right? So, it's really important to understand the power, the kilotonnage power of little boy and fat man versus the potential of power in the actual use of any one of them, the cruise missiles on B-2s, etc., or in the ICBMs. They're like 370 kilotons each. The massive megatonnage power today. The broken arrows and broken spears. I've been reading. I didn't only read about them in Command and Control by Eric Schlosser, who did a really fine job of identifying those. But it's ongoing. When you read the dangers, like when you read about the planes, the B-52s flying those nuclear weapons under their wings, etc., to Barksdale Air Force Base. What did you think? It's totally illegal to do it. But then secondly, just think about the dangers. They didn't know for 36 to 48 hours that they even weren't there anymore in Minot. So it's getting more and more sensitive. And more generals and admirals and more people, are telling us that this is the urgent time in history for us to realize this focus issue of getting rid of nuclear weapons and war. And then when we do, all of it's connected. Every issue I read, whether it be fossil fuel and the leaking pipelines, whether it be people not permitted to come into our country, stacked at the border, when we've been this wonderful, welcoming nation. The racism that is intensified based on the fact, we always kill people of color. That's it. When you study the nations where we go to war, you can see it very evidently. And so I invite us to listen to Carol and see what part of it could be done by you and your community group of people. And even though it may start small, I want you to know you will be connected with people all over the world. We just got a list from Italy of 25 cities that are on record supporting this treaty. The stuff coming into us about the nations. We have 26 nations now that have ratified. We have 70 nations that have formally signed. So if you never believed before it could happen, I'm telling you, it's going to happen. It's not if, it's when. And we need to be part of it. We need to, every person that we see, when we wear our shirts on the metro trains and on the buses, etc., everybody will go like this. So it's a time, it's a key time. And I thank God. I've worked on it for 50 years at least, and I believe the time is coming. I don't think I'll be living when everyone is gone because it's going to take a process. We have verification in place. We have everything in place in the institutions. This treaty has 3 parts: preamble, prohibitions, and the institutions that will carry it out. I trust them. It's very well analyzed. It's very well developed. Okay for now. Thank you so much. There'll be time for questions after too.
So we don't use PowerPoint. I don't use PowerPoint, even though it's got some wonderful things, because you know, you go to a place and then does the machine work, whatever. But the International Red Cross, Red Crescent, and I'm going to pass out some things to you in a minute, has about a 2.5-minute video called "What Would You Choose, Live or Die?" It is excellent. It is really, really very powerful. And I think we all know in this room that we live in a time when we're faced with the undeniable threat to humanity. We can react with despair, defeatism, cynicism, amnesia, or hope. And I came across a book called Hope in the Dark: Untold Histories, Wild Possibilities by Rebecca Solnit. And this is what she says about hope. Hope is an embrace of the unknown and the unknowable. It is the belief that what we can do matters, even though how and when it may matter, who and what it may impact, are not things we can know beforehand. We may not, in fact, know them afterwards either, but they matter all the same. And history is full of people whose influence was powerful after they were gone. She calls for hope that is interested in broad perspectives with specific possibilities, ones that invite or demand that we act. And she says, together we are very powerful. We have a seldom told, seldom remembered history of victories and transformation that can give us confidence that yes, we can change the world, because we have many times before. And that in uncertainty lies the power to influence the future. And we're going to look now at some ways that you can prevent nuclear war. And as Ardeth mentioned, it is really important that you decide as an individual, you decide as a community, you decide as a city, as a state, as a nation, what role you are going to play in this. So, the first thing we have down here is joining the movement. That is really important. If you flip the page over to the other side, you will see that we have 5 websites. Now, there's hundreds of websites, okay, and you're probably overwhelmed. What I do is I bookmark these, and every day I just go to them like this and see what new has been put up. So the first one there is, have people got them? Oh no, you need to keep passing those. Yeah, everybody needs to take one of those. I'm sorry. So that first one there is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. They are the key organization for this treaty, and they have all the updates, and it's all the countries of the world. It's not, just, the United States is part of that. But in the United States, we have the Treaty Compliance Campaign, and that really came out of Timon Wallace from Northampton, Massachusetts, and that website is specifically the United States, where we are, what we're doing. Back from the brink, 2 of the groups that were really responsible for a lot on this treaty were the Physicians for Social Responsibility and the Union of Concerned Scientists. And they have developed what is called Back from the Brink, which are 5 demands that they're making. And so some cities are making resolutions to support just the treaty that Ardeth talked about. Others are supporting the Back from the Brink. Those 5 goals that they have is renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first, ending the sole unchecked authority of any president to launch an attack. 3, taking the U.S. nuclear weapons off high trigger alert. 4, canceling the plans to replace the entire arsenal with the enhanced weapons, the so-called modernization, but that's not a good word because we're not modernizing or creating new ones. And then 5thly is the treaty, supporting this treaty. They also have an excellent website with all kinds of things on it, the Back from the Brink folks. And then the International Red Cross, Red Crescent. I didn't know this until we were at the UN. I hear Red Cross, and the woman gets up and she speaks and she's beautiful, and I'm saying, oh, this is so wonderful, the Red Cross.